I'm Mr. MegaManFan, and this is Space Invaders for Atari 2600. If Helen of Troy was the face that launched 1,000 ships, Space Invaders was the game that sold 1,000,000 Ataris, because this was the breakout hit of the Atari video computer system, which later became known as the 2600 to most of you out there. But I do have to say, in all fairness, even though it was a system seller, there are some things about it that I'm not super fond of. For example, I usually play Space Invaders with the strategy of eliminating the column that's all the way to the left and keeping them from dropping down rows faster by wiping out columns moving to the right from there. But unfortunately, with the 2600 version, you can't move all the way to the left, so even at the very start, there are aliens that you can't hit. And because there are just 6 rows of aliens, it's not even effective to try to attack them that way, because they're coming down very fast given how wide they are across the screen, so you're actually better off taking out the bottom row and working your way up. The usual strategies with Space Invaders aren't super effective here. On top of that, you only have 3 bases instead of the usual 4, and they're very narrow, so you don't have much room to shield yourself from enemy fire that's coming your way. Does that make this a bad game? No, I wouldn't go that far. Does it make it the best home version of Space Invaders you can play? Definitely not. The Avengers, which was Space Invaders by any other name on Commodore 64, was a much closer to true arcade experience. So I would definitely start there if you were going to play it. I wouldn't necessarily say that's the definitive way to do it, but it beats this. But at the time, this was all there was in North America, so it was literally better than nothing, especially if you were one of those parents who was probably tired of your kid hanging out at the arcade, pumping quarter after quarter after quarter into a Space Invaders arcade cabinet. You were probably like, damn right, I'm gonna buy this thing, get Space Invaders, they can play it at home all they want, and then save me some money in the long run. And then you're gonna have to buy more Atari games, so maybe not save some money in the long run, but you get the idea. And of course, it was novel at the time just to have a home console where you could actually play multiple different games by inserting a cartridge, because up to that point, the only system that really had interchangeable games was the Odyssey, and those really weren't interchangeable games. They were just changing different displays of light patterns on the screen, and then you put the overlays on the screen to actually have quote-unquote graphics. Whereas with the Atari 2600, you're actually changing the program that the console is running by plugging a new cartridge with new code into the console. You're actually generating a different game with the hardware with each cartridge you put in. Now, there was Bally Astrocade around the time of the 2600, so similar ideas were out there. The Odyssey 2 would come along at some point in this era, but for home consumers, the 2600 was really the first breakthrough interchangeable cartridge system, later followed by Intellivision and ColecoVision. But Space Invaders and Atari 2600 set it off, so I would say for historical purposes, this game is really important. And is it still fun to play? Absolutely. I enjoy it. It's just not Space Invaders as we know it. And unlike my review of Pac-Man on 2600, I'm not even going to say it's a fun game despite being nothing like what it's from. It's actually like what it's from. It's just I can play other versions of Space Invaders that come much closer than this. Welcome back to Space Invaders. I'm your host, Mr. MegaManFan, and today we're looking at the Atari 5200 version, which somehow manages to be both better and worse than the Atari 2600 version at the exact same time. First problem, the aliens are opening from left to right instead of from right to left. That is worse. Now, I will give them credit for putting more aliens on the screen than the 2600 version, that's a good thing, but they still don't look right. They don't look like the actual Taito Space Invaders, and that's a bad thing. And also, these UFOs occur far too frequently. You don't get those that often in the home ports that are actually accurate to Space Invaders. They shouldn't be coming by every 10 seconds. Maybe once every minute or a minute and a half. Certainly not every few seconds while you're shooting these aliens down. Also, if you're paying attention to the way the waves move from one side of the screen to the other, it's pretty jerky. It feels like they stop and start instead of fluidly flowing across. I can't really explain it better than that, but their motion is atrocious. And it gets even worse when you notice that the alien forms change with each progressive wave. The whole reason Space Invaders was such a relentless arcade game is that it was always the same aliens stacked up from bottom to top, 5 rows, multiple columns, 55 invaders, always relentlessly coming at you, always the same. They didn't change their appearance from one board to the next. They got closer to you at the start of each board, but they didn't change their appearance. At least the 5200 version, like the 2600 version, gets that right. They start out closer to you, but the waves are still wrong, and it's even more wrong because it's going the wrong direction at the start here. And these bases, there are still only 3 shields that you can hide behind as bases, and I don't get why they're cycling through a rainbow of colors. It should be static, one color, doesn't matter what color it is, but it shouldn't be this. And oh my god, what is up with this first row of Space Invaders that are coming at me now? They look like space fish that are having a seizure. They can't decide whether to swim left or right, so they're just manically hopping back and forth between the two. It's almost like they tried to put Galaxians in the Space Invaders. They wanted some sort of aliens that would move their shape as they moved up and down the screen, but they overdid it. If they were flying toward you like Galaxians or Galaga, that would be fine, but that's not what they're doing. They're marching toward you. So having them be so animated actually makes things even more absurd instead of more visually appealing. And that's part of the problem that really sinks the 5200 version. The 2600 version may have overly simplified what Space Invaders is as you know it and would expect it to be, but at least it wasn't visually garish. The aliens weren't freaking out on the screen the way the ones are here, and they were moving in the right direction at the start, and it's so impressive that they managed to actually get Space Invaders more wrong on a more powerful system. It's as though they had their boundaries expanded, and instead of realizing they could create a more faithful arcade game within those expanded boundaries, they did the exact opposite and decided to get even wackier with it. That's not what people wanted. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe somebody actually wanted these dancing tuxedo aliens, these fish aliens with seizures that are spastically moving around. I didn't want that. If you wanted that, you can tell me in the comments, but this is yet another failure to bring Space Invaders home. What's up with those UFO values too? 10, 20, 30? I would accept 150, 300, 1500, not 10, 20, and 30. It's just, if I wasn't a fan of the core Space Invaders mechanic, I couldn't sit here and play this for you, but take my word for it, the 5200 version is no good, and I don't even know that I can really say it's better than the 2600 version. I think I would rather play that, but I would definitely rather play Avengers on Commodore 64 than either of these games. I'm Mr. MegaManFan, and today we're looking at the first home version of Space Invaders on an Atari console that doesn't suck. And sadly, it was not even made by Atari, This is actually a homebrew game sold through AtariAge.com, made by my friend Bob DeCrescenzo. I'm probably butchering his last name and I apologize, but I just call him Pac-Man Guy most of the time because he has made very awesome ports of numerous Pac-Man games for the Atari 7800, including, unbelievably, Baby Pac-Man, the only Pac-Man pinball game, and he still found a way to make an Atari 7800 version of it. That is the kind of awesome programmer Bob is. And because of that, he has also made an awesome version of Space Invaders for the Atari 7800. Now, I do have to amend some things that I said previously about the Atari 5200 version. I was complaining that the very first aliens sweep to the right, and I was saying, oh man, that's wrong. They move to the left at the start. So, yes, I'm right and wrong about that because technically they do move to the right at the start in a proper Space Invaders, but they're so close to the border that they immediately bounce off it, drop down, and move left. The problem, the Atari 5200 problem, is that the whole playfield wasn't full of the invaders, so the entire set of invaders sweeps to the right, and that looks terrible. They should all be on the screen and then move to the right and immediately drop down and start coming to the left. That's what proper Space Invaders does. And this is proper Space Invaders. The aliens look right. There's 11 columns by 5 rows. The UFOs display the correct values when you hit them. In fact, I'm betting that Bob is such a perfectionist, and I know Bob is, that if you counted the number of shots you fired, you could actually adjust the values of the UFOs when you shoot them. Because in real arcade Space Invaders, that's what happens. The UFO value is determined by the number of shots that you have fired. And like proper Space Invaders, there are 4 bases to use as shields to hide behind. So this is accurate in almost every detail, down to the lettering at the top, looking like the Taito arcade lettering, the font that they used for displaying the game, which was a very basic, generic-looking font. It's like a typewriter text font. It's not special, but that's what makes it special, is that it's not special. This is an authentic experience. And again, Bob, being such a perfectionist the way he is, he even put an options menu at the beginning of Space Invaders for the Atari 7800 so that you can actually be an arcade operator and flip the dip switches and change the settings to whatever style of Space Invaders that you want. I prefer the default settings for the most authentic experience, but if you want to do crazy things with it, have at it, go to town. That's what he put it in there for. He wanted it to be as flexible for the home user to enjoy all of the options that they wanted. Another thing I commend him and give him praise for about this version is that it sounds right. The March of the Invaders picks up speed and the music picks up speed at the proper pace. It goes slowly at first, do, 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 do. And just like real Space Invaders, the more invaders you eliminate, it gets faster and faster and faster. And it has that little bit of pulse quickening effect to it that you just get more and more into it as the march gets faster and the aliens move a little faster. And then eventually, oh my God, they're flying at you. You gotta get those last ones. They're moving so fast and you gotta shoot where they aren't instead of where they are, as was famously said in that episode of Futurama. Thank you, Bob. You finally made a Space Invaders for Atari that doesn't suck.